This presentation was produced for SIS 6010. Policy choices have the power to reduce or exacerbate what Urse refers to as social barriers to the information access. In our presentation, we will be exploring the ways in which these dynamics play out in the world of public librarianship, as well as potential shifts to come in library policy. This first slide brings us to value-driven policymaking. When developing policy, libraries have to balance civil rights and pragmatism. It often boils down to a quality versus quantity argument, which supposes that limiting certain kinds of access creates a more serene and functional information space. The American Library Association states that to ensure the effective delivery of service and to provide full access to library resources, libraries should develop policies and procedures to address user behavior that may interfere with others' use and enjoyment of the library. While the organization strongly urges libraries to refer to the Code of Ethics of the American Library Association, the Library Bill of Rights, and federal, tribal, state, and local law, including the First and 14th Amendments, while developing regulations regarding user behavior, it's typically left to the discretion of individual libraries. Patrons in crisis. We define them as those who are facing significant social challenges. Crisis as a term implies an urgency and a lack of other supports that's significant in the pressure that it puts on librarians to respond with empathy. For this exercise, we are defining patrons in crisis as those who are facing challenges such as homelessness, substance abuse, poverty, domestic violence, mental health issues, physical health issues, and children at risk, specifically those who are facing challenges with literacy. We will be discussing rules of conduct in public libraries and their effect on these groups, and debating whether or not these rules are properly serving their intended purpose. Many of these causes can be comorbid with each other and further exacerbate the potentially marginalized identity of a person struggling through them. Our first argument is about a person's physical presence in the library, essentially the space we take up. We review general library policies to assess what causes enough concern for documentation. Of course, libraries want to do their best to provide a safe and healthy environment for all of their patrons and staff. In a limited survey performed in the UK in 1996, 18% of library staff reported they were increasingly fearful of going to work due to risk of attack or abuse, often citing specific concerns about patrons under the influence of alcohol or drugs and those with psychological issues. It's also concerning that exposure to aggressive behavior or threat, whether direct or indirect, may cause further emotional trauma to people struggling with PTSD or other issues surrounding IPV or domestic violence. Librarians need to work with a wide range of people, not just the ones who need the most help. The question then becomes, do space-sharing policies tempt librarians to push away users without actually serving them? While these might not restrict a large number of patrons at any given library, these regulations could prove much more challenging to someone who might not otherwise have access to a safe, clean environment, or who might be otherwise struggling with any number of issues that make these regulations insurmountable or dehumanizing. There is a movement to have social workers at public libraries. They can then intervene and assist with a person in crisis. Another important element of social workers in the library is to act as a role model for other library staff, demonstrating empathy, understanding, and even how to diffuse tense situations. Access to technology has become a crucial need for people in crisis. As government agencies shift into the digital age, paper applications for assistance are becoming obsolete. Many job applications are exclusively online and include lengthy tests. As noted by Berteau, McClare, and Jagger in 2008, an almost complete majority of libraries in the U.S. provide free public internet access to their community members, which include computers to use, printers, and Wi-Fi. Many libraries make sure to hold instructional courses, which G and Bug found in 2009 were mostly targeted towards senior crowds. Many libraries create easy-to-access resource pages on their website homepage that link their patrons to e-government access pages as well as employment resources in order to make those potentially difficult situations easier. The technology is in place, but do library policies prevent it from being of any use to someone who is struggling? Beyond free access itself, there are many concerns as to how individuals are able to interact with this free internet access. On an everyday basis, users may not have ever used the internet and may need instruction or help, especially in times of crisis. Unfortunately, in times of crisis, an instructional course may not be time effective, and a user may need help at the library computer. Library staff may have policies where they simply do not have time to help internet users with figuring out how to work the computers. This policy can be found on the New York Public Library's website as an example. Again, Berteau and McClare and Jagger have pointed out that sometimes session limits are put on patrons as libraries in order to allow for more people to access the internet, but also because there may be bandwidth limitations that demand libraries to limit its patrons' computer use. These limits may not allow time to finish important documents. Emergencies rarely happen between the hours of 9 to 5. Lemon argued in 2019 that when it's outside of library hours, it could be important to community members to access Wi-Fi in times of need, though many libraries turn off their Wi-Fi when the library is closed and shut out community to potential crisis help. Some libraries charge for computer use if the patron doesn't have a library card, or if there are outstanding fines on a cardholder's account. Libraries could change their budget in order to reflect a need for greater bandwidth, though other important budgetary needs may be affected by these changes and may cut back analog mediums or library programs that community members could benefit from. Another subject that is much debated and very important to people in crisis is how fees and fines affect library use. Otis D. Alexander compiled an example list of services that libraries charge for, although each library uses their own set of policies. Some of the examples are overdue fines, damaged books, DVD rental, out-of-district library cards, printing, copying, faxing, interlibrary loans, reserving meeting rooms, and proctoring tests. So the argument for fines and fees. Many librarians feel that fines and fees prevent borrowers from taking advantage of a free system, essentially teaching them responsibility. By having these fines in place, it assures that materials are promptly returned so other community members may use them. Jerome in 2012 addressed the issue with passion in Occupy the Library, Fines, a Manifesto. She asks, how right is it to let a few essentially take advantage of the rest? Providing high-quality service isn't free. Alexander expressed his concern that libraries will not be able to sustain themselves financially long-term. Fees charged by libraries make a stronger presence in the community and are less dependent on the taxpayer. If a person is being charged for a service, they are more likely to stay engaged in the interaction. But on the other hand, a study conducted by Zhang discovered that libraries in low-income areas have low circulation rates because families fear the cost of overdue items. The fear of an additional expense prevents them from ever accessing the vital resources available for them and their children. De Faviri wrote about the effect a $25 book replacement cost will have on the relationship between a patron and the library. It will cost the library more than $25 to convince this mother to return to the library. It will cost the library more than $25 to persuade this mother that the library is a welcoming community place, willing to mount literacy programs aimed at her children, who will not benefit from regular library visits and programs. And when these children are adults, it will cost the library more than $25 to convince them that the library is a welcoming and supportive place for their children. Meg Johnson-Duprist argues, the administrative costs, including equipment rental, collection contracts, and staff time associated with collecting funds from patrons, often equals or exceeds the revenue earned from library fines and fees. For middle-class families, a $10 fine will have little to no impact, but for a family struggling to find money for food, $10 is a substantial loss. In a mission statement from the Belmar Public Library in New Jersey, says, we will work with the community to provide materials, information, technology, and opportunities to educate, enrich, and entertain people of all ages and backgrounds. Community needs and technologies are constantly changing. In order for libraries to stay relevant, it is imperative that they change too. In some instances, social workers may join libraries in need of extra attention to its underserved patrons in need. More often, though, libraries must formulate their policies based on problem identification and agenda setting, budgeting, policy adoption and implementation, and evaluation as examined by Urse. The consequences of unfair policies may reflect back on the library by way of less patrons and more lawsuits. Overall, it's the duty of libraries to formulate policies that protect users in crisis, though the formulations and enforcement of these policies put in place to protect its resources and employees sometimes make it difficult.